Welcome, everyone, to Bitcoin Magazine's Meet the Taco Plebs. Today, I have a fantastic guest, quite popular on Twitter, and he's written some great articles for us, Mind Over Matter. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself real quick?
Hey guys, yeah, I'm Mind Over Matter. Kind of worked on and off with Casey here the last few months as I've been kind of writing articles. Great guy, uh, love interacting with him and just broadly, love the space in general. So I'm looking forward to diving right in.
So you kind of have a great intersection of fitness, health, lifestyle, and just Bitcoinery. I think there's a lot of people on Twitter and in our space who intersect those kind of things. And you are one of my favorite people to bring those kind of things together because you seem to understand the culture behind those things. Jumping right into it, though, I'd like to ask you about how you got into Bitcoin specifically. What's your Bitcoin rabbit hole story?
Yeah, sure. So I got into Bitcoin in, I guess, mid 2017 or so, around like July, right? There was kind of a little, run up at the beginning of the year. I had heard people talking about it like in the beginning of 2017, here and there, but never really thought anything of it. So I just, one time, probably in like the middle of June, I just like read this book about, I think it was maybe like the age of cryptocurrency or something. And that's kind of what got me into it initially. But when I got in, right, like I kind of was like, I saw Bitcoin had run up from like $600 to, at the time it was like 2,800, right? And I was like, man, I missed the boat, right? So like I didn't buy in that much, right? So I was like, I'm gonna kind of edge my way in a little bit. And then later in 2017, of course, I bought it all up in like November and December, kind of near the top. Luckily, I held it through and didn't sell any, but I didn't really fully kind of go down the rabbit hole until like late 2019, kind of when the repo markets collapsed, because I just always had this as like, I viewed it as a hedge position, right? I viewed it through the lens of gold, and it was going to kind of supplant gold. And that was not completely wrong. I mean, it's, I guess, in the right direction, right? But I missed the forest for the trees. So it was really like, I've been in since, I guess, 4.5 years now or whatever. But really, it was probably like late 2019 before I even really understood it at all. And even then, like my understanding is like constantly evolving, right? So like how I understood it, in 2020, in 2019 was like still through the lens of an investment account, and now I view it
Mhm.
broadly through the lens of a savings account. So maybe in 6 months or a year, I'll have, even more insight, but I don't think so. I think I'm kind of at the, understand it through the lens of a savings account. I don't think that's going to change at all. So that's kind of my kind of broad Bitcoin rabbit hole story.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's like the way that a lot of the sort of narrative is heading towards like the savings account style way of seeing things. And I think that's a common story is for people to kind of have this evolution of the way they see Bitcoin. Sometimes it starts out as an investment, sometimes it's something more speculative, and sometimes it's something totally different. It's interesting, but I think a lot of people go through that same sort of like evolution of how they see Bitcoin. But on top of that, I guess I would ask, how has Bitcoin changed your life? Because a lot of people say Bitcoin changes their life in so many ways. So,
Yeah, great question, right? So just I've been into kind of bodybuilding and aesthetics for, pretty much my entire adult life, 13 years, 12 years, whatever. And really like, I mean, seriously, probably within at least the last decade of that. So forever until kind of, I went down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. Probably I never kind of made the connection between kind of low time preference, from like a monetary standpoint, and kind of what you do in the gym, what you do with your mindset and things like that, right? Like I was kind of like I always just went to the gym, but it never really clicked for me, right? So the first decade I was going, I was training my body, but I wasn't training my mind. As that evolved, right? So like I'm broadly actually come from the, like the self improvement space and kind of, right wing bodybuilding Twitter, so to
mhm,
speak. And as I kind of evolved through that, one of the, things I realized that like you're also training your mind when you train your body, and ultimately that ends up being the main thing that you train, because you just kind of hits these genetic limitations, right? Where you go into the gym and you're not anymore trying to train what is kind of on the outside, but you're training what's on the inside, right? You're training
Mhm.
getting up every day. You're training to be a warrior. You're training to be a soldier to fight whatever life's battles are thrown at you. So, kind of circling, coming kind of full circle with that back to how that relates to Bitcoin, and this is something that I didn't put together until recently, but one of the ways I would say it's changed my life, or will, right, is um, the ability to have a family, right? So one of my probably the single biggest motivating factor for me is having a family, right? And
Mhm.
for the last, however long, like I didn't know if that was possible because of how quick your savings is being debased. Well, now since I've been saving in Bitcoin for some time, that becomes more of a possibility. So, the thing I'm most excited about is, eventually being able to break away from my fiat job and focus on, having a family, uh, health even more full time, and just things of that nature. So, I think broadly, I think most of how Bitcoin's going to change my life might still be in front of me. At least that's what I'm hoping and expecting. So, but it's already kind of setting like the path in motion for that to happen.
Well, that's a fantastic answer. I mean, I haven't asked anyone that question and gotten back that that they think it's mostly in front of them, but I think that's totally true for all of us. Is that the way that Bitcoin is going to change us the most is probably in front of us. And you also touched on some other great points about how the link between going into the gym and maintaining your health and low time preference, and then how that goes back to wanting a family. That's such a common theme amongst Bitcoiners is wanting a family, and then the world they grow up in or live in is making that so difficult with the chaos of inflation, the fiat world in general, and just politics. I think this all brings us back to ground to where we feel like we can have a family, and that's such an important part of the future and going forward. What we want to lay as our seeds, literally in the ground, and what we want to see, coming from the future. So you touched on some fantastic points there, and I think kind of relates to what my next question. I was going to ask about the posts that you've made for us. A couple of great posts here at Bitcoin Magazine. One of them is how Bitcoin solves the store of value problem, and the other is Bitcoin's monetary superiority is guaranteed by physics. And your posts on Twitter are often about health and the mind. And I wanted to ask you how you kind of related this into your lifestyle mastery, Bitcoin, and the general idea of Bitcoin. How does this relate to you and your what you're often espousing on Twitter, which is that mind over matter idea of conquering yourself and being a warrior?
Yeah, great question. So, the my favorite article, I think it was the thermodynamics one, right? The monetary energy, right? And it's just because that ultimately, just the first and the third law of thermo, I think, are what secures Bitcoin at a very base level. Like if we're kind of going all the way back to for really first principles thinking. And that's, like obviously energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transferred, right? So at the end of the day, monetary energy is just a kind of the means through which our kind of physical labor is being given in the market, right? So we have this monetary energy. Then with the second piece of that, right, you have the idea of entropy, right, and that is that ultimately for Bitcoin, what I view it is through the lens primarily of a store of value, as my other article alluded to, that all of the kind of monetary energy in the world for store value, at least, right? Like at least for store value is going to tend to just one good. So, and I think that it's my opinion that that's Bitcoin, right? So at least as far as store value monetary energy goes, Bitcoin's already won, right? And I think I would argue, at least in the marketplace, it's kind of won already too, because of the block wars, right? So like we there was a chance for, you know, Bcash to supplant it, surpass it, whatever. But the market decided
Mhm,
otherwise, right?
mhm,
100 to 1, it decided otherwise, because that's about the ratio that it's traded at since the fork in late 2017. So to me, that Bitcoin won, in 2017, and post that for the store value, right? Like that's where Bitcoin won. Now, relating that back to some of my posts that are kind of more health and fitness related, is because if there's a limited amount of energy that you have or that I have, right, we have to be very, very conscious of how we choose that energy, or how we choose to spend that energy. One of the suggestions that I have is, like, obviously, like, you need to go to the gym. Obviously, you need to eat healthy, right? Like, these are just core tenets that we all know. But I think that there are other elements too, and that's why some of my posts are, like, for instance, like, really anti-porn, anti-masturbation, because what you're doing is you're giving away your most sacred form of energy, and that when you watch porn slash masturbate, especially when you masturbate, because sexual energy is the most potent form of energy that you have, right? So I like to talk about that, because to me, semen retention is one of the most important aspects of aligning all of your energies, physical, psychological, spiritual, together, because that is ultimately where your base layer of energy comes from. So just kind of bringing that full circle, if we're coming back to the low time preference thing, eating junk food is obviously high time preference. Skipping the gym is high time preference, but also that there are kind of tertiary things, right? And one of the tertiary things to me is, it's actually not even tertiary. I think it's just, it should be one of the primary aspects of energy, and that's sexual energy. You should preserve your sexual energy at all costs, because that is your most sacred form of energy. So if we're going to be, low time preference as, broadly a community, and like I said, I come more from the self improvement space, right? That's my specialty more so than Bitcoin, right? So I can talk about this better than I can talk about, like, even most Bitcoin topics. When we are at the point where we hold each other accountable, then we are becoming trending towards the most low time preference possible, right? So we should be actively, we shouldn't just, like, individually reject pornography and masturbation, but we should be actively against it as a community, in my opinion. So that's kind of
mhm.
where everything comes full circle to me. And again, I only speak for Mind Over Matter. I don't speak for anybody else. But as a guy that's broadly an aesthetics guy, but broadly a self improvement guy, I do think that all of the principles from the aesthetics movement, from the self improvement sphere on Twitter, are very, very valuable, and they're all applicable to people that believe in low time preference, which the Bitcoin community, does for the most part. So I do like to bring all of those traits, characteristics, and aspirations from the broad self improvement space into the Bitcoin space. And there's stuff that I can learn from the Bitcoin space too, right? Like, I don't know that much about kind of you know like mining, so I enjoy people's posts on that, because I'm just a novice when it comes to that. So that's kind of just bringing it full circle there.
No, I definitely think you hit some good points, and I think we could even go far to say that you're like the next evolution beyond just regular Bitcoining, because the sort of like low time preference lifestyle that you're talking about on Twitter is the next step beyond Bitcoin, right? So, Bitcoin could be thought of as like granting us the ability to save our time and think low time preference, because with, in the fiat world where money is always being diluted, you can't really stop and think about these things. But with Bitcoin, it really enables the thought towards low time preference, future health, how long you want to live. And And yeah, I think it does come back full circle, as you said. We want to store energy. We need to store energy physically. We need to store energy sexually, as you said. We need to store energy in a monetary way. And so, yeah, I think I really think that we could go as far to say that your type of low time preference lifestyle is just the next evolution beyond what Bitcoin enables, right? It's what we're looking for. It's what we all want. To be able to think about those things because in a fiat society we don't really even get the ability to consider the future as much as we are now. So yeah, I think Bitcoin is just fantastic at doing that, and I think your account is a great example of those two things mixing. But moving on to the next question, I want to ask you about what you're looking forward to in the Bitcoin space specifically, or in life in general, either one. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, great question. So one of the things that I'm kind of most looking forward to going forward is kind of what the ecosystem looks like as of the actually the next bear market in terms of the education, what like kind of the circular economy starts to develop looks like around that. And the reason I say that is this, right? So we had this like run up in obviously 2017 when I first got into the space. And during 2018 and 2019, a lot of that time where I was just kind of like, only passively paying attention. But that's when a lot of the building happened, right? All that capital inflow that happened in 2017, it didn't. I mean, it went away from the network temporarily a little bit, but the broader ecosystem built out greatly in there's that 3-year bear market. And if we do what I think it's going to do over the next 6 months, and we go kind of that next order of magnitude up. So, in terms of like total capital, we're going to talk. What we're talking about is the ability to start to actually build a circular economy around Bitcoin. The ability to kind of take a lot of the ideas of the sovereign individual and manifest them into actually like building, our own networks. Because we have to, right? With the obviously the vaccine mandates, the creeping authoritarianism, the socialism that's already here. Like we have to start thinking about like how are we going to build our own infrastructure? And obviously these were not things that were at least actively on the concern template in like 2017, 2018. I know that there are bright people that were thinking that this was coming sooner than rather than later. They were ahead of me on that. I it didn't really fully click with me until March 2020. But what I think is going to happen is how we saw kind of like exchange infrastructure kind of built out, how we saw like podcast infrastructure start to get built out in the last bear market. Well, the next step in post all this capital inflow, and if when we correct for a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever, what we're going to start to see is an actual economy emerge that's separate of just whether it be kind of on-chain transactions, whether it be just lightning, but like a I was talking to somebody about like potentially like an airline for Bitcoiners because you don't have to worry about like mask mandates or vaccine mandates or things of that nature. So what I'm looking forward to is kind of hopefully when all this capital like inflows from these like institutions and stuff, some of these institutions that we will be able to kind of orange pill them, not just on a monetary level, right? Not just like we're looking at the bond math and they decide to allocate, 5% of their portfolio, but allocate them on or kind of advocate for a like a broader freedom hypotheses too, as
Mhm.
they see what the capital inflow can do, not just to their portfolios, but I think to the broader network. So I'm looking at like airlines being built by Bitcoiners. I'm looking at like water infrastructure being built because there's chemicals in the water that are screwing up the water supply. I'm looking at kind of food lines being built. That's what I'm looking at, as we get into 2022 and beyond, is how can we start to think about building out our own economies to kind of divest ourselves entirely from the legacy system, break off entirely from kind of the socialist and the communist regimes that control Western quote unquote democracies. And I'm kind of doing air quotes here because I believe democracy is a complete farce. It's
Mhm.
complete psyop. But that's what I'm looking at going forward.
Yeah, Bitcoin, community sovereignty maximalism, right? Like just completely disconnecting from the fiat world. I think is what you're describing, and I think like that's the end goal, right? Like when we see on Twitter all the various things that we call out as being fake, call out as being, obviously unnatural and obviously not good for us. And you mentioned so many different, examples, but there's just so much to do in terms of infrastructure being built. I agree. I think that's something that all of us can look forward to. Regardless of bull or bear market, there's always going to be Bitcoiners building for this sort of self-sovereign world. And I think that's the next iteration. I think you've really hit that on the head. And yeah, I think you know, as going forward, Bitcoiners just they need to be building things with Bitcoiners in mind, right? And as you said, the circular economy is that next sort of step forward. But to round us off here, I always like to ask our guests, Mr. Mind Over Matter, about their price predictions for the end of this year as well as for the end of 2030. So I'm curious what you think the price may be, and don't be afraid to get too bullish.
Yeah, so I'll be honest. I've got a theory that the cycle is going to be extended, right? So, like, I've got. I think the cycle is going to go into 2022, and I've stated a few times that I think it's going to the peak price will reach is between like 250 and 300K. That's where I'm guessing that we'll see the peak probably sometime in early 22 is my thought. I think we're going to see like a run up in the Q4 into December, and then maybe get to like 90 100K, and then it kind of fakes us out a little bit, like it's like that was it, and then we have like the real blow off sometime in like like March April-ish.
Hmm.
And I could be wrong, but I've got this theory about like extended cycles that I've been developing because of what I'm looking at is kind of block sense having, and what
Hmm.
I'm kind of analyzing is if you look at like the 12 to 13, 12 having happened in November of 12, and the peak happened in December of 13, so that's 13 months. July of 16 was the next halving, and the peak was December, so that's 17 months. So that means just the next iteration would be 22 months, which would put us at like March of 22, because the halving was in May of 2020. So, and again, like I'm not somebody that thinks that like the block time is the ultimate determinant, right? That there's other factors, but there's a lot of things that lead me to believe that um like the cycles are extending, and that we will see broadly actually us break away from the 4-year cycle entirely as time goes on, and it becomes more of a macro asset. um as far as 2030 goes, my guess is that we'll be pretty much on a Bitcoin standard by then. So I like the fiat price, like it's hard to say how meaningful that would be, but I guess it's going to be um, in terms of like 2019. I'm just going to benchmark to $2019 because it's just hard to do without doing that. I think it's
Hmm.
going to be between 5 and 10 million a coin in 2019 dollars. Now that could be nominally 50 million by that point, right?
Yep.
But in terms of purchasing power, I think it's going to look like uh, I'll go like 7.5 million per coin in 2019 purchasing power dollars. And like I'm getting that just because of the $130 trillion bond market, and assuming that like it's the product market fit takes up like that pretty much the um, the entire kind of sovereign and agency bond market.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about on the point there. And that's interesting. No, I've never heard the extended cycle theory, at least on this podcast yet. So it's interesting to hear, end of cycle around March, which I kind of am inclined to agree with, to be honest, because extending cycles is sort of the it's the indication of what things have been extending over time. So I do find that a compelling answer, and I'm certainly in agreement with 2030. I don't think I find it interesting that you chose $2019 as the peg because I myself I can't, it's hard to keep up with inflation now that we've been printing so much in the pandemic. And it's like, what do you base inflation on? Do you base it on housing? Do you base it on, the CPI basket of goods, which would completely, be manipulated? So it's interesting to think that that was probably the last time which we could all agree on the general rate of inflation. And after that, it just kind of gets wonky. So pretty in agreement with you there. But thanks so much for coming on Mind Over Matter. Is a fantastic conversation with you. If any of the listeners have not gone and read his articles, please go and look them up. They're quite fantastic, and most importantly, follow Mind Over Matter at Raw Nationalism on Twitter. Fantastic Twitter, as I've said before on my Twitter, one of my favorite accounts to follow. So thanks everyone so much for listening. Mind Over Matter. Thank you so much for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Casey. This is great. I can't wait to do it again in the future.
Definitely. Thanks everyone again, and check out the next podcast when it's up. See you later.